I pushed through the revolving doors of the Sentinel Security Services building. My new workplace stood 20 stories high in downtown Chicago. The lobby stretched out before me, all polished marble and sleek minimalism. At this hour, nearly 11 p.m., the place was empty. My footsteps bounced as I walked toward the security desk. "Wilson, you're on time." Michael Thompson didn't look up from his computer as I approached. I'd only met him once before during my interview, but his permanent scowl was hard to forget. "Yes, sir. Ready for my first shift." He finally looked at me, his gray eyes giving nothing away. The night shift requires strict adherence to protocol. He pulled a typed sheet of paper from a drawer and slid it across the desk. "These are the rules. Memorize them." I picked up the paper and looked at the list with growing confusion. Rule 1. No personal items on the security desk. Rule 2. Monitor all security feeds continuously. Rule 3. If the man in the hat appears on monitor 3 at midnight, do not attempt to communicate with him. Rule 4. Do not open the security office door if you hear knocking between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. Rule 5. If an unauthorized individual enters the building, detain them without conversation. Rule 6. If monitor 6 activates on its own, turn it off immediately. Rule 7. Complete a patrol of the 4th floor at 3:30 a.m. precisely. Rule 8. If the red alarm light activates, hide under the desk until it turns green. I laughed, waiting for Michael to crack a smile. He didn't. "Is this some kind of initiation thing? Scare the new guy?" "This is standard protocol," Michael said, his voice flat. "The office is down that hallway. First door on the right. Your shift ends at 7 a.m. He stood up, gathering his briefcase. "Follow the rules exactly, Wilson." "But what's with these weird—" "Exactly," he repeated, cutting me off. I watched him walk toward the exit, his back rigid. He pushed through the revolving door and left, leaving me alone in the lobby. The security office was smaller than I expected. Just enough room for a desk with a computer setup, a mini fridge in the corner, and a worn office chair. 8 monitors lined the wall above the desk, each displaying a different area of the building. Monitor 1 showed the main lobby. Monitor 2 captured the exterior doors. Monitor 3 displayed an empty hallway that looked like it led to conference rooms. The others showed various corridors, a break room, and what looked like a storage area in the basement. I sat down in the chair, which squeaked, and placed the rules sheet on the desk. The office felt stuffy, so I loosened my tie. The security uniform wasn't uncomfortable, but the stiff collar bothered me. "First night, here we go," I mumbled to myself, checking the time on the computer screen, 10:58 p.m. I started checking each monitor. The building looked completely empty. No cleaning staff, no late workers, just empty hallways and dark rooms. Everything seemed normal, if really quiet. As I leaned back in the chair, I noticed a desk drawer slightly open. I pulled it wider, finding a few pens, some paper clips, and a crumpled piece of notebook paper. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. I smoothed the paper out on the desk. The handwriting was messy and quick, like someone had written it in a hurry. They're not just rules, they're survival instructions. I turned the paper over, looking for more, but that was it. Just that single, dramatic line. "Very funny," I said aloud, shoving the note back in the drawer. Clearly, one of the other guards was trying to mess with me. New guy hazing wasn't exactly original. I spent the next hour checking out the building's layout on the security computer. Sentinel Security Services was on the ground floor, while different companies rented the upper floors. Nothing unusual showed up in the building's specs: standard fire exits, elevator systems, and utility rooms. By 11:45 p.m., I'd made another round of checks on all the monitors. Everything was quiet. Too quiet, really. In most buildings, night security meant dealing with the occasional cleaning crew or late worker. Here, the silence was complete. I found myself reading through the rules again, stopping at Rule 3. The man in the hat. What kind of rules warned about specific people showing up at specific times? I shook my head, thinking it was just office humor. The computer clock read 11:58 p.m. I felt a little nervous as I watched monitor 3. The hallway it showed was empty, the overhead lights giving off a bluish glow on the polished floor. This is stupid, I told myself, but I kept watching anyway. 11:59 p.m. I leaned closer to monitor 3, my eyes fixed on the empty hallway. I felt nervous, though I was still certain nothing would happen. The digital clock on the computer flipped to 12:00 a.m. Monitor 3 glitched. Just once, a quick distortion of the image. When it cleared up, a figure stood in the previously empty hallway. A man in a dark suit and hat was standing in the middle of the corridor. I couldn't see his whole face because of his hat, but I could tell he was looking right at the camera, right at me. My mouth went dry. I blinked hard, expecting the image to change, but the man stayed there, completely still. I picked up the rules sheet again, reading Rule 3 with new understanding. If the man in the hat appears on monitor 3 at midnight, do not attempt to communicate with him. I pushed back from the desk, feeling very alone in this huge, quiet building. The man on the screen didn't move, didn't blink, just kept staring at the camera. Suddenly, Michael's warning didn't seem like a joke anymore. The man on monitor 3 didn't blink, didn't move, didn't do anything that normal humans do unconsciously. He just stood there, staring directly at the camera with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I checked the time, 12:03 a.m. I leaned closer to the screen, looking at his features. The hat shadowed most of his face, but I could make out a sharp jawline and thin lips pressed into a straight line. His suit looked old-fashioned, the kind with wide lapels that hadn't been in style for decades. The longer I watched, the more creepy it became. How did he know to look directly at the camera? And how had he appeared in a locked, empty building without triggering any alarms? I glanced at the rules sheet again. Rule 3 stared back at me. If the man in the hat appears on monitor 3 at midnight, do not attempt to communicate with him. What did that even mean? How would I communicate with someone through a security monitor? I looked around the desk for a microphone or speaker but found nothing. Just the standard keyboard, mouse, and the steady noise of the computer tower beneath the desk. At 12:10 a.m., I decided to check the building's entry logs. I clicked through the security system's menu until I found the access records. According to the system, no one had entered or left the building since the cleaning crew left at 9:45 p.m., yet there he stood. When I looked back at monitor 3, the man had tilted his head slightly, as if curious about what I was doing. I pushed my chair back from the desk, the wheels squeaking against the floor. The movement was instinctive, putting distance between myself and something that shouldn't be possible. The digital clock on the computer flipped to 12:15 a.m. Between one blink and the next, the man disappeared. The hallway on monitor 3 was empty again, with no sign anyone had been there. I rewound the footage, watching it in slow motion. One frame showed the man standing perfectly still, and in the very next frame, he was gone. No blur of movement, no door opening. Just there. Then, not there. What the hell? I muttered, rewinding and playing the footage again with the same result. I stood up, needing to move, to do something besides stare at the monitors and wonder if I was losing my mind. As I pushed my chair back, my knee bumped hard against the underside of the desk. The hollow sound it made caught my attention. I bent down to look at the desk more closely. Running my fingers along the bottom surface, I felt a slight seam that didn't match the rest of the construction. I pressed against it, and a small panel popped open, a hidden compartment built into the underside of the desk. Inside was a small, spiral-bound notebook with a black cover. The edges of the pages were worn, some of them dog-eared. I pulled it out and opened it on the desk. The handwriting inside was tight and rushed, filling the pages with observations, diagrams, and what looked like timestamps. On the inside cover, a name was written, Sarah Mitchell. I flipped through the first few pages, getting more interested as I read. Day 1. The rules seem ridiculous. Michael wouldn't explain any of them, said it wasn't his job to hold my hand. Fine, whatever. Day 3. The man in the hat appeared on monitor 3 exactly at midnight. He stayed for 15 minutes, then vanished. No entry logs. Nothing on the exterior cameras. How is this possible? Day 7. The man in the hat watches to make sure you're at your post. I tested it by leaving the room at 11:59. When I returned at 12:05, he was facing the door instead of the camera. He knew I had left. I flipped forward several pages, finding more frantic entries. Day 12. The clown feeds on fear. Don't look at it. I made that mistake. Turned off monitor 6 too late, heard it in the vents all night. I closed the notebook and checked the monitors again. Everything looked normal. Empty hallways, dark offices. But the building now felt different, like it was watching me back. The digital clock read 1:28 a.m. I opened the notebook again, looking through entries for anything about what might happen next. Several pages mentioned knocking. The knocking starts at 1:30. Do not open the door. She isn't human. I saw Parker answer it on his last night. The security footage showed him being dragged down the hall by something with too many limbs. 2 minutes later, right on schedule, I heard it. 3 sharp raps on the office door. I froze, staring at the door's small window. The hallway outside was dark, and I didn't see any movement on the monitors when the knocks came. I remembered Rule 4. Do not open the security office door if you hear knocking between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. 5 knocks in rapid succession. I stayed seated, gripping the armrests of my chair. The rules sheet and Sarah's notebook both warned against answering. Whatever was out there, it wasn't something I wanted to meet. The knocking escalated, becoming a pounding that shook the door in its frame. It sounded less like knuckles now and more like someone using their entire fist, or maybe something harder than flesh and bone. Then, in the small rectangular window of the door, a face appeared. It was a woman, or something wearing the appearance of a woman. Her face was pale, with dark hair falling past her cheeks. But her smile stretched too wide, extending beyond the natural corners of her mouth. Her teeth shined in the low light, too numerous and too sharp. She pressed her face closer to the glass, that impossible smile widening even further. I could see now that her eyes were all wrong too, completely black, with no whites or irises visible. I sat completely still, hardly daring to breathe as she pressed her palm against the glass. The window began to fog, steam rising from her hand as though her skin burned at an impossible temperature. She dragged her fingers down the glass, leaving 5 steaming trails. The pounding stopped. The face disappeared from the window. On monitor 1, which showed the main lobby, I caught a glimpse of a dark shape moving with unnatural speed toward the stairwell before vanishing from view. My hands shook as I picked up Sarah's notebook again. They test you. Each rule broken weakens the barriers. The building was constructed to contain them, but they've learned the weak points. The rules aren't for our safety. They're containment procedures. Sentinel doesn't guard the building. We guard what's inside it. Another entry caught my eye. I've mapped their appearances. The patterns are consistent. Man in hat at midnight. Knocking at 1:30. Red light at 4:15. Once you understand the patterns, you can predict them. Maybe even use that against them. I checked all the monitors again, looking for any other weird stuff. Everything seemed quiet for now. The handprint on the door's window was already fading, the glass returning to normal as if nothing had happened. The digital clock on the computer showed 2:08 a.m. I pulled the rules sheet closer, reading through the remaining items. I still had to patrol the 4th floor at 3:30 a.m. according to Rule 7. The thought of leaving the security office after what I'd just seen made my stomach twist. But staying here meant following the rules exactly. At 2:10 a.m., movement on monitor 2 caught my eye. The exterior door, which should have been locked, swung open slowly. A man in dark clothing stepped into the lobby, moving deliberately and slowly. He turned his face toward the camera, showing hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes. Rule 5 popped into my mind. If an unauthorized individual enters the building, detain them without conversation. I took the security baton from its holder on the wall and headed for the door, my hand pausing on the knob for just a second before I pulled it open. I took the security baton and rushed to stop the suspicious man, remembering Rule 5. The lobby was really quiet as I confronted the intruder, a thin man with hollow cheeks wearing a black overcoat. "You need to come with me," I said, avoiding conversation as instructed. The man tilted his head in a weird way. "The red light comes for all new guards," he whispered before turning into dark smoke that spread into the air vents. Scared, I went back to the security desk where Monitor 6 suddenly turned on, showing the building's basement storage room. A clown with white makeup and a red smile stood right in front of the camera. I quickly turned off the monitor, following Rule 6. Right away, childlike giggling sounded through the air ducts, followed by scratching against the office walls. I sat completely still, ignoring the noises as instructed. After 10 long minutes, the sound stopped. I turned Monitor 6 back on. The basement was empty. I found another of Sarah's notes. I saw what happens to those who break Rule 7. Don't enter the break room, no matter what you hear inside. I grabbed my security baton and rushed from the office. I hurried down the hallway toward the lobby. Rule 5 was clear. If an unauthorized individual enters the building, detain them without conversation. After what I'd just seen with the woman at the door, following the rules seemed like my only option for survival. The lobby was big and quiet. The marble floor shined under the dim emergency lights. The man stood near the center of the lobby, completely still. He hadn't moved since I'd spotted him on the monitor. He looked even stranger in person. His face was very thin with hollow cheeks. The black overcoat he wore was too big for his skinny body. His skin was so pale it looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. "You need to come with me," I said, keeping my voice firm while avoiding any additional conversation as the rules instructed. The man didn't move toward me or away. Instead, he tilted his head at an angle that looked wrong, too far to one side like his neck had extra joints. His eyes locked onto mine so hard that I wanted to look away. "The red light comes for all new guards," he whispered. His voice wasn't what I expected. It was quiet but clear, with an old-fashioned lilt to it, like someone from a black-and-white movie. The words sent a chill through me, especially after reading about the red light in Sarah's notebook. Before I could react, the man's outline began to blur. His edges seemed to disappear, the line between him and the air fading away. Then his body broke apart into wisps of dark smoke. The cloud hung in the air for a moment, still kind of shaped like a person, before flowing upward toward the ceiling. The smoke disappeared into an air vent, leaving me alone in the lobby. I stood frozen, the baton now loose in my hand. My mind struggled to process what I'd just seen. People don't dissolve into smoke. That's not possible. Yet after the man in the hat and the woman at the door, I was running out of rational explanations. The lobby suddenly felt exposed. Whatever things lived in this building, I was standing in the open. I backed toward the hallway, looking around at every shadow, every corner. Only when I reached the entrance to the corridor did I turn and hurry back to the security office. I shut the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment as I tried to steady my breathing. The monitors lit up the dark office, each screen showing empty corridors and rooms, except for one. Monitor 6 had activated on its own. The screen showed the basement storage room with its concrete floor and metal shelving units stacked with boxes and maintenance supplies. Standing directly in front of the camera was a clown. Not a normal circus clown. This one wore cracked white makeup that showed patches of gray skin underneath. Its smile was painted red, stretching from ear to ear in a weird, fake-looking smile. The costume it wore might once have been colorful, but now looked faded and stained, hanging in tatters around its skinny body. It stared directly into the camera, unblinking, its head tilted at the same unnatural angle as the man in the lobby. One hand slowly lifted, fingers unnaturally long, reaching toward the camera lens. Rule 6 flashed in my mind. If monitor 6 activates on its own, turn it off immediately. I lunged for the control panel and hit the power button for monitor 6. The screen went black, making that part of the wall go dark. For a second, nothing happened. Then I heard it, a high-pitched giggle that seemed to come from the air vent in the ceiling. The sound was childlike but wrong, like an adult doing a poor imitation of a child's laugh. The sound carried through the ducts, sometimes sounding far away, sometimes sounding like it was right above me. The giggling was joined by scratching sounds against the office walls, slow, deliberate scratches that moved around the perimeter of the room, as if something was dragging sharp nails along the drywall just on the other side. I remembered Sarah's notes about the clown. The clown feeds on fear. Don't look at it. I made that mistake. Turned off monitor 6 too late. Heard it in the vents all night. I sat down in the office chair, forcing myself to remain still. The scratching continued, moving from wall to wall, occasionally pausing before starting again. The giggling came in bursts, sometimes fading to whispers that I couldn't quite make out. My instinct was to react, to look for the source, to try to understand what was happening. But the rules in Sarah's notes were clear. Engaging with these entities only made things worse. So I kept my eyes on the remaining active monitors and tried to ignore the sounds. 10 minutes passed like this, though it felt like hours. The scratching grew more frantic at times, as if whatever made the noise was frustrated by my lack of response. The giggling turned to soft sobbing, then back to laughter. I kept my breathing steady and my body still. Eventually, the sounds faded away. The scratching stopped first, followed by the last traces of that unsettling giggle. The silence that followed felt almost as heavy as the sounds had been. I waited another 5 minutes before reaching for the control panel again. I turned monitor 6 back on. The basement storage room appeared on screen, completely empty. No sign of the clown or any disturbance. The boxes and shelves stood in the same positions as before, undisturbed. My hands shook as I leaned back in the chair. The night was only half over, and I'd already encountered 3 entities. The man in the hat, the woman at the door, and now the clown. Not to mention the man who turned to smoke in the lobby. I reached for Sarah's notebook again, hoping to find more information that might help me survive until morning. As I picked it up, a loose page fell out, dropping to the floor. I bent down to get it, recognizing Sarah's handwriting immediately, though this note seemed to have been written with more urgency than the others. I saw what happens to those who break Rule 7. Don't enter the break room no matter what you hear inside. I checked the rules sheet again. Rule 7. Complete a patrol of the 4th floor at 3:30 a.m. precisely. I glanced at the clock. 2:43 a.m. I still had some time before I needed to do the patrol, but the warning about the break room sent another chill through me. What had Sarah seen? And why specifically warn about the break room? I flipped through more pages of her notebook, looking for answers, trying to prepare myself for whatever would come next in this nightmare shift. I took one last look at the office clock. 3:28 a.m. Time for the patrol mentioned in Rule 7. The thought of leaving the safe office made my mouth go dry. After everything I'd already seen tonight, the man in the hat, the woman with the impossible smile, the clown in the basement, and the man who turned to smoke, the last thing I wanted was to walk the building's hallways alone. But breaking the rules seemed even more dangerous. I took my flashlight and the security baton, though I doubted either would help against the things in this building. Before leaving, I put Sarah's notebook into my back pocket. Her warnings had already proven right, and I wasn't going to leave such important information behind. The hallway outside the security office was empty and quiet in front of me. My footsteps sounded against the tile floor as I walked to the elevator. I pushed the up button and waited, always looking over my shoulder. The soft ping of the arriving elevator made me jump. I stepped inside and pushed the button for the 4th floor. The doors closed with a soft sound, leaving me in the small metal box. As the elevator went up, I realized how trapped I was. If anything happened, I had nowhere to run. The numbers lit up one by one above the doors. 1, 2, 3. Each floor passing very slowly. The elevator felt colder than normal, my breath showing in small clouds in front of my face. When the display changed to 4, the elevator shook slightly before stopping. For a moment, I thought about staying inside, pushing the button for the lobby and making a run for it. But Sarah's notes and everything I'd seen convinced me that breaking the rules would only make things worse. The doors opened, showing the 4th floor hallway. Fluorescent lights made noise overhead, one of them blinking halfway down the hall. The floor had several law offices, their glass doors dark and their reception areas empty for the night. I stepped out of the elevator, and the doors closed behind me. The quiet up here felt different, heavier, as if something wasn't right. I began my patrol, moving down the hallway, checking that office doors were locked and that nothing was strange. About halfway down the hall, I passed the break room. The door was closed with a small rectangular window, just like the one in the security office. I remembered Sarah's warning clearly. Don't enter the break room no matter what you hear inside. I planned to walk right past it, but something stopped me in my tracks. Help! Someone please help me! The voice came from inside the break room. My voice. Not similar. Identical. The same pitch. The same rhythm of speech. The same slight Midwestern accent I'd never been able to shake. This isn't happening, I whispered to myself, taking a step back from the door. Please, I'm trapped in here, help me! My voice called out again, more desperate this time. My mind raced for explanations. Maybe it was like the woman at the door, something that could mimic human appearances and sounds. Or maybe it was some kind of recording, though I couldn't imagine how anyone would have samples of my voice. Every instinct told me to walk away, but I found myself moving closer to the door. Sarah's warning kept playing in my head, but my curiosity and a weird feeling of concern for what sounded exactly like myself won out over my caution. Just one quick look, I reasoned. I won't go inside. I leaned toward the small window, my fingers gripping the door handle. Slowly, I pushed it open just enough to peek inside. What I saw made me stumble backward, my stomach lurching violently. On the break room table sat my head. Not a replica, not something that looked like me. My actual head, cut at the neck yet somehow still alive. My eyes, blinked and looked around the room in panic. The mouth opened and closed, forming words I couldn't hear through the ringing in my ears. Above the table, hanging from the ceiling by thick black cords that looked more like veins than rope, was the rest of my body. The limbs jerked randomly, fingers grabbing at nothing, legs kicking weakly as if trying to run. I slammed the door shut and backed away, my back hitting the opposite wall of the hallway. Bile rose in my throat, and I fought the urge to throw up. That couldn't be real. It couldn't. Yet it had looked so real, down to the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident and the freckle on my right earlobe. I turned and ran down the hallway toward the elevator, no longer caring about doing my patrol right. All I wanted was to get back to the security office where at least I understood the rules. The elevator seemed to take forever to arrive. When it finally did, I practically fell inside and hit the lobby button over and over. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the hallway, a dark thing that seemed to come out of the break room door. The doors shut before I could see it clearly, and I was glad for that. Back in the lobby, I ran to the security office and locked the door behind me. My hands shook as I dropped into the chair, the room spinning slightly around me. I pulled out Sarah's notebook and started quickly flipping through the pages, looking for anything about the break room or what I'd just seen. Several pages in, I found an entry dated about 3 weeks ago. The break room is where they show you your future, not what will happen. What could happen if you keep breaking the rules. I saw myself drowning in black liquid that poured from the ceiling vents. Yesterday, I saw myself with glass shards embedded in my skin, blinded and crawling across the floor. Today, I saw myself split in half from head to navel, still conscious somehow, my organs visible and pulsing. They're getting worse, more detailed, more painful. I think they're running out of patience with me. The next page contained what appeared to be her final entry, the handwriting more rushed and uneven than before. They show you your possible future if you keep breaking rules. I've seen my death 3 different ways now. I don't think I'll survive another night. I'm close to figuring it out, though. The symbols in the basement, the patterns of their appearances, it all connects. There's a way out of this, not just the building, but the cycle. If you're reading this and I'm gone, I either found the escape or became one of them. Don't make my mistakes. Follow the rules until you understand them. Then you can break them properly. I stared at the page, trying to process what Sarah meant. Symbols in the basement? Patterns? Before I could search for more information, I noticed the time. The digital clock on the desk read 4:14 a.m. Rule 8 flashed in my mind. If the red alarm light activates, hide under the desk immediately. As if on cue, at exactly 4:15 a.m., a red light on the alarm panel began to pulse. The air in the room seemed to thicken, making it harder to breathe. A low buzz came from somewhere deep in the building, vibrating through the floor and up into the desk. I didn't hesitate. I dove under the desk, making myself as small as possible in the knee space. I pulled my knees to my chest and tried to control my breathing, which suddenly seemed too loud in the silence. The buzzing grew louder, and the red light pulsed faster. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, deliberate steps that didn't sound human. There was an odd, dragging quality to them, as if whatever was walking was pulling something behind it or struggling to lift its feet properly. The footsteps stopped just outside the security office door. The handle turned slowly, metal scraping against metal as the door swung open. I hid under the desk, legs pulled tight to my chest, as the security office door opened with a creak. Those footsteps made my skin crawl, too heavy for a person, with a wet, dragging sound like something being pulled across the floor. Each step made a soft squish, followed by a scrape. A smell hit me so strong I had to cover my mouth to stop from gagging. It was awful. Rotting meat mixed with sulfur and something else I couldn't name, something chemical and wrong. The air was thick with it, making each breath through my fingers taste disgusting. The footsteps slowly moved around the office, circling the desk. I pushed myself deeper into the shadows, trying to make myself as small as possible. My back hurt from sitting awkwardly, but I didn't dare move. The red light kept pulsing through the room, washing everything in crimson waves that made the shadows under the desk change and move. Something knocked over a cup on the desk above me. I heard liquid splash onto the floor, followed by a low, wet sound, like a tongue licking up the spilled coffee. Then came a deep, rumbling noise that might have been a pleased groan. Long, discolored fingers with cracked black nails suddenly grabbed the edge of the desk above me. The nails were thick and curved, more like claws than human nails. The skin was patchy gray and yellow, with areas that looked slick and others that seemed dry and flaky. Dark veins showed clearly underneath. I held my breath, sure that if I made even the smallest noise, those fingers would reach down and find me. My lungs started burning, but I stayed still, counting in my head to control the panic building inside me. The thing in the room breathed in a ragged, wet way, like someone with fluid in their lungs. Each breath out ended with a bubbling rattle that made me think of drowning. It moved around the office, opening drawers and shuffling papers. Something heavy hit the wall by the door. Every few minutes, it would stop and make a low, guttural sound. somewhere between a growl and a question. The sound seemed to vibrate in my head, making my teeth hurt and my vision blur for a moment. The minutes felt endless. My cramped legs went from painful to numb. Sweat ran down my back even though the room had gotten strangely cold. I stared at my watch, tracking the slow passing of time. 5 minutes, 10, 15. At one point, the thing bent down, and I saw what looked like a shoulder and part of a head. The skin was burned and blackened, with cracks showing pulsing red tissue underneath. I closed my eyes, not wanting to see more. 20 minutes passed like this, the longest 20 minutes of my life. Just when I thought I couldn't handle the strain anymore, the red pulsing light turned green. The change happened right away. The creature made what sounded like a disappointed sigh. The fingers let go of the desk, leaving behind a dark, oily stain. The footsteps moved away, each one sounding less solid than the last. The door closed with a soft click. I waited 5 more minutes before I dared to move, counting each second. When I finally crawled out from my hiding place, every joint in my body hurt. My legs had fallen asleep, and I felt pins and needles as blood started flowing again. I leaned on the desk for support, breathing deeply now that the nasty smell had mostly gone away. The office looked just like I'd left it, except for the coffee spill on the floor and the black stain on the desk where those fingers had grabbed. I touched it carefully. It felt cold and sticky, like oil mixed with ash. When I pulled my finger away, it left a dark mark that took several wipes with a tissue to clean off. I checked all the monitors. Each screen showed empty hallways and rooms. Whatever had been in the office with me wasn't on any of the cameras now. I sat in the chair, my body shaking with fear and exhaustion. For the rest of my shift, I stayed alert, checking the monitors over and over. I looked through Sarah's notebook again, searching for anything about the red light and what came with it, but found nothing specific. Maybe she never lived long enough to write it down. At 5:58 a.m., I heard the main entrance opening. Monitor 1 showed a man coming into the lobby, stocky build, dark hair with some gray at the sides, wearing the same Sentinel security uniform I had on. He moved like someone used to being careful. I felt so relieved. My shift was almost over. I'd made it through the night. At exactly 6:05 a.m., someone knocked at the security office door. I checked the camera before opening it. Definitely human, definitely wearing the right uniform. "Come in," I called, my voice rough from lack of use. The door opened to reveal my replacement. Up close, I could see the dark circles under his eyes and a big scar that ran across his right cheek. His eyes were sharp and sizing me up as he looked me over. "You made it," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Most don't last the first night." "I'm James Wilson," I said, extending my hand. "Robert Martinez," he replied, shaking it firmly. "Been on night shift for 3 years now." I gathered my things, including Sarah's notebook, which I tucked securely into my jacket pocket. As I handed over the security keys, Robert noticed my hand trembling slightly. "First night jitters never really go away," he said with a grim smile. "You look like you could use some coffee." I nodded and thanked him, and he took me to the lobby where someone had set up a small coffee cart. The morning cleaning crew was already working, nodding to us as we walked by. Everything looked so normal with daylight coming through the big windows. Nothing showed what had happened during the night. Robert poured 2 cups from a thermos he'd brought. "Company coffee tastes like piss," he explained. "I bring my own." We sat on a bench near the entrance, drinking coffee while people started coming in for the morning felt weird after what I'd gone through. "So you saw it," Robert said after a few sips. It wasn't a question. "Saw what?" I asked cautiously. "Whatever comes with the red light. Different for everyone, they say. But always something that leaves that black shit behind." He nodded toward my hand, where a faint, dark smudge remained despite my attempts to clean it off. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. I didn't really see it clearly. Just fingers, part of what might have been a shoulder. Burned skin with red underneath. Robert nodded. Some say it's what's left of the night guards who broke the rules. Others think it's something that was here long before the building. He took another sip of his coffee. Truth is, guard security isn't guarding the building. We're containing what's inside it. What is inside it? I asked. This place was built over something old, Robert said, lowering his voice despite the growing noise of the day staff arriving. Something that wants out. The rules keep them in check. I pulled out the rules sheet Michael had given me the night before. These rules? Those are just the basics. There are more, depending on what night it is, what floor you're on. He eyed me carefully. You found her notebook, didn't you? Sarah's. I tensed. How did you know about that? Because she showed it to me once, about a week before she disappeared. Said she was figuring out patterns, connections. Robert stared into his coffee. Smart woman. Too smart for her own good, maybe. What happened to her? I asked. Nobody knows for sure. She just didn't show up for her shift one night. Company line is she quit without notice. He looked up at me. But the night before, she told me she'd found something in the basement. Something about symbols. I remembered the last entry I'd read in her notebook. The symbols in the basement, the patterns of their appearances. It all connects. There's a way out of this. You're coming back tonight, aren't you? Robert asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. After everything I'd experienced, the logical answer should have been no. I should run as far from this building as possible and never look back. But the mystery of what happened to Sarah, the weird things I'd seen, the hints about symbols and patterns, it all pulled me in. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how certain I felt. I'm coming back. Robert nodded, something like respect showing in his tired eyes. Bring chalk, he said, finishing his coffee and standing up. White chalk. You might need it. As I walked out of the building into the bright morning sun, I already knew I'd be back when darkness fell. I had Sarah's notes, new information from Robert, and I was determined to learn what had happened to the woman whose warnings had kept me alive through the night. The morning sun didn't help but make the scary stuff from last night any less real as I walked back to my apartment. I kept thinking about all the impossible things I'd seen. The man in the hat, the woman with too many teeth, the clown, and that thing that came with the red light. I was super tired, but I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my laptop looking for info about the Sentinel security building. Most of what I found was boring: property records, tenant histories, renovation permits. I was about to give up when I found an article from the Chicago Tribune archives from 1963. The headline said, Westbrook Asylum Fire Claims 37 Lives. A black and white photo showed a burned building, smoke still coming from the rubble. The caption said the asylum had been completely destroyed, and the land stayed empty for almost 10 years before the current building was built. When I dug deeper, I found some pretty disturbing stuff about the asylum. Reports of patient mistreatment, experimental procedures, and mysterious deaths. The fire had started in the basement, where they kept the most difficult patients. One account said people heard screams long after the building should have been empty. I printed everything I could find and put it in a folder along with a small box of white chalk I'd bought on my way home, remembering Robert's weird advice. I was exhausted and scared, but something kept pushing me forward. Sarah had found something important, and I needed to know what it was. When I showed up for my second night shift, the lobby was empty again. The cleaning crew had already left, and the overhead lights made everything super bright, but I knew that would change to darkness and scary stuff soon. I walked to the security office, my footsteps making noise in the empty hallway. The office looked exactly like I'd left it that morning, except for a fresh cup of coffee on the desk with a note next to it. Good luck. R was all it said. Robert had expected me to come back, and that simple, friendly gesture made me feel a bit better. I sat in the chair and checked all the monitors. Everything looked normal, Empty hallways, dark offices, quiet corridors. I placed Sarah's notebook on the desk in front of me, along with the folder of research and the box of chalk. Then I took out the rules sheet and went through it again, even though I already knew every word by heart. By 11:45 p.m., I had a plan. If the scary things followed the same schedule as last night, I could predict when they'd show up. The man in the hat would appear on monitor 3 at midnight. The knocking would start at 1:30 a.m. Thomas Baker would show up around 2:15 a.m. The red light would turn on at 4:15 a.m. I watched monitor 3 as midnight got closer. My hands weren't shaking this time, and my mind was clear even though I was still scared. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, but I knew I needed answers. At exactly midnight, the screen went fuzzy like before. When the picture came back, the man in the hat was standing in the hallway, looking right at the camera. His face was mostly hidden by shadow, but I could tell he was the same guy from last night. Instead of just watching him, I opened Sarah's notebook to a blank page and put it on the desk, facing the camera. I didn't know if he could see it or if this would do anything at all, but it was worth a try. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The man just stood there, looking at the camera. Then slowly he took a step forward, something he hadn't done before. He took another step, getting closer to the camera. I could see more of his face now. Pale, skinny, with deep eyes that looked really sad. He raised a hand toward the camera, his fingers thin. The picture on monitor 3 started to get messed up, with lines of static across the screen. For a moment I thought the monitor was breaking, but then the static cleared, and the man was gone. I checked the time, 12:15 a.m., exactly when he had disappeared the night before. I looked down at Sarah's notebook, expecting to see the blank page I'd left open. Instead, the page was filled with weird symbols I didn't recognize. They looked like a mix between very old writing and math equations, arranged in a circle with smaller symbols inside. I flipped through the rest of the notebook, looking for any mention of these symbols, but found nothing that matched exactly. Sarah had drawn some similar marks in her later entries, but none with this specific arrangement. The hours went by slowly. At 1:30 a.m., the knocking started just like before. I stayed at my desk, completely ignoring it. The woman with the too many teeth showed up in the door's window again, her black eyes looking hungry, but I kept focusing on the symbols, trying to understand them. At 2:13 a.m., monitor 2 showed movement at the outside door. Thomas Baker came into the building walking the same way as before, moving through the lobby toward the security office. This time, I didn't grab my baton or try to stop him. Instead, I waited, with the symbols from the notebook ready. At 2:15 a.m., someone knocked softly on the door. 3 gentle taps, nothing like the violent pounding from the woman earlier. I opened the door to find Thomas standing there with his sunken cheeks and deep eyes that looked even creepier up close. "You came back," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Most don't." "I need answers," I replied, stepping aside to let him enter. I closed the door behind him. Thomas moved to the desk, his gaze immediately fixing on the open notebook with the symbols. His eyes widened, a spark of recognition lighting his face. "She found it," he whispered, reaching out but stopping just short of touching the page. "Sarah actually found a way out." "What are these symbols?" I asked. "And what did you mean last night about the red light?" Thomas looked up at me, his expression changing from surprise to something like hope. "How much do you know about this building? About what happened before it was built?" "I know it was constructed on the site of an asylum that burned down in 1963, I said, pulling out the folder of research. 37 people died in that fire. Thomas made a sound that might have been a laugh, but held no humor. 37 recorded deaths. There were others. Patients whose existence was never documented. Experiments that were kept off the books. "What does that have to do with what's happening now?" I asked. "We're all still here," Thomas said simply. "The entities you've seen, The man in the hat, the woman at the door, the one that comes with the red light. We're all souls trapped by the fire, bound to this place. I struggled to process what he was saying. You're dead? A ghost? Not exactly a ghost. Something between living and dead. Trapped in the moment of our deaths, forced to relive it night after night. Thomas gestured to the building around us. Sentinel Security didn't build this place to keep things out. They built it to keep us in. Why? What would they gain from that? Protection, Thomas said. Power. The trapped souls create a kind of energy that the company harnesses. We're their security system, their watchdogs. The rules you follow aren't for your protection. They're containment procedures to keep us under control. The pieces started to fall into place. The specific timing of the entity's appearances, the strict rules, the way the company seemed to expect night guards to encounter impossible things. And Sarah? I asked. What happened to her? She started to understand the patterns, the connections between us. She found symbols in the basement, old protection markings from the asylum, but she realized they could be reworked. Thomas tapped the page of symbols. These aren't just random markings, they're a key, a way to break the cycle and free the trapped souls. Did Sarah use them to escape? Thomas nodded. She found a way out, not just from the building, but from the cycle entirely. That's why the company says she simply disappeared. She broke free, and they couldn't admit that was possible. I stared at the symbols with new understanding. And you want me to help free you too? Thomas began, but stopped suddenly, his head snapping toward the alarm panel. It's coming early tonight. The red light began to pulse, turning the room red. The building started buzzing, making the floor shake. But the clock showed it was only 2:43 a.m., not 4:15 a.m. like the night before. They know, Thomas said urgently. They know you're trying to help me. Quick, get under the desk. I hesitated, but the look of real fear on Thomas's face convinced me. I ducked under the desk, holding Sarah's notebook and the chalk Robert had told me to bring. The heavy, wet footsteps I'd heard the night before came toward the security office. But faster this time, almost running. The door didn't open. It burst inward, wood splintering as something huge forced its way through. From where I was hiding, I could see Thomas standing firm. His outline got blurry, his body turning into that same dark smoke I'd seen before. But instead of going into the vents, the smoke spread out, making a wall between me and whatever had crashed through the door. Through gaps in the smoke, I saw bits of the thing. A burned, messed up figure with skin that cracked, showing glowing hot spots underneath. It moved all wrong, like it was broken, its arms and legs bending in ways they shouldn't, its head always shaking and twitching. The smell hit me again, that awful mix of rot and chemicals that made my eyes water. The thing jumped at Thomas's smoke form, its clawed hands going through him but still hurting him somehow. Thomas's smoke twisted and got thicker, fighting back, but I could tell he was losing. The symbols. Thomas's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Draw them now. With shaking hands, I pulled out the chalk and began copying the circular arrangement of symbols onto the floor beneath the desk. My first attempts were clumsy, the lines wobbling as the fighting intensified above me. I forced myself to focus, to make each mark as precise as possible. As I drew the final symbol, the markings started to shine with a soft blue light. The light spread from the circle, filling the room and pushing back the red flashing alarm. The entity screamed in rage and pain, its burning body twisting as the blue light hit it. Thomas's smoke body seemed to get stronger from the light, becoming thicker and more solid. He rushed forward, surrounding the burned entity. Both of them got pulled toward the center of the symbol I'd drawn, the blue light getting brighter until it became a blinding white swirl. I covered my eyes, the light too bright to look at directly. When I lowered my hand, both Thomas and the entity were gone. The symbols on the floor shined for a few more seconds before fading to ordinary chalk marks. The red alarm light turned green, and the noise stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. I crawled out from under the desk, legs shaking as I looked around the destroyed office. The door hung from a single hinge, completely broken. The desk was burned in places, and the bad smell of the entity still hung in the air. As I moved to check the monitors, I noticed something on the floor where the symbols had been, a small folded piece of paper that wasn't there before. I picked it up and unfolded it to find a message written in handwriting I recognized from Sarah's notebook. "If you're reading this, I'm free. You can be too."